Okay, so this is mining scenario for apartment purchase. So call it a permanent purchase scenario. There could also be a refinance as well. But um, there's always an ask. Client is going to want certain things based on leverage. Typically they might want 70, 75. Sometimes they might want to go 80. And again, if you get up into leverage, 75 is probably the max, maybe 80. Anything higher than that, you're probably going to need to do permanent financing, or sorry, mezzanine financing is fairly typical for that type of situation. Now, when you get into mezzanine financing, just remember that it's really has to be a larger transaction, probably like, call it 7, 8, 9. I'd even say 10 million and higher. If you do mezzanine financing, you'll be able to learn about that in some of our other lessons of what mezzanine financing is. So 70, 75, 80 is probably max leverage on permanent, financing. Recourse, non-recourse is much more readily available for apartments. And again, that, just going to dictate as to who you go to. Banks typically are not doing non-recourse, although there are some that do. Um, but so it's more probably agency financing. So recourse versus non-recourse is what you're going to run into. Pricing, again, whenever you're dealing with apartments, you're probably going to be dealing with premium pricing. It's a hot product. It's a competitive product. So they're going to want the best pricing. Is my guess, 5-10 year fixed, loan with a 30-year amortization. Timing is, 60 days, pretty normal. 45 to 60 days is pretty normal for permanent financing turnaround times from start to finish. So there's nothing too difficult there. Although if timing squeezes down to like 30 days or less, that starts to push you into more of a private type of loan or something that's going to be a quick bridge. So just realize that as timing squeezes down, that will affect who you go to. It's just not realistic if you're dealing with, 20 days or something like that. That gets really tricky to get something done. Asset type, again, we're talking about apartment. Major metropolitan area is going to dictate leverage big time. If you get into smaller markets, they call them pre-review markets, or areas that are not as readily available. So just realize that is what you're up against there. Again, when you're dealing with the asset type, you're dealing with units. How many units are there? What's the unit mix? What's the square footage? What's the condition of the property? All these factors come into play with respect to who you're going to go to, who will look at it, et cetera, et cetera. If you're dealing with beat up properties, you start to lose potentiality to go to like an agency financing. And it might be, going to more of a, call it a, private group or maybe a local bank. Cash flow, again, the cash flow on these needs to be 1.25 or greater in order to know how much leverage you can get. That's the critical part. That if that's not there, then the leverage isn't going to be there. So the cash flow has to be there. So if something's at 1-to-1 and it's 75%, you're going to have to go to 65 or lower in order to get there. So you just have to understand your numbers for cash flow for apartments. Lenders are going to underwrite with so vacancy factor of 5%. They're going to take into consideration the expenses of 2,800 to 3,500 or 3,200 per door per unit for expenses that are fairly normal. They're going to use $250 per unit per year, as a expense ratio to strip off the cash flow. So just understand that those are some general barometers, when you're looking at these. But so you gather all that information, realize that you have to have the cash flow. If you don't have the cash flow and they need the leverage and everything else, just realize that's going to go to a bridge loan scenario. It's not going to go to a conventional lender. So the cash flow has to be there for a true permanent loan. And if it's not there, you just have to go bridge or private. Client experience. If they don't have a lot of experience, that makes it a little bit trickier to go with like an agency financing. It's not a deal killer, but it makes it harder because experience matters. The net worth definitely is a big factor for you to get into some of the places like agency financing. Again, 1.5 to 2 times. Net worth at least 1 to 1 for that in order to go in there. So that could be a factor for sure in order for somebody to get in there or not. If you've never done an agency loan before and you don't have the experience, that could make it really tough. Or if the client has some credit issues like a bankruptcy or a foreclosure, that could make it really tough for you to get into agency financing. So you might have to go CMBS, or you might have to go bank. So that's gonna, which affects your recourse. Client outside cash flow. If you're dealing with a bank, they definitely want to see outside cash flow. They want to see that you have some outside cash flow. So just recognize if they don't, that makes it hard to go to the bank. If they do, that's great. Business cash flow, again, we kind of talked about cash flow on the asset. Ownership, they're probably gonna have multiple partners, maybe it's one, but that will be something you want to look at for sure. The equity, again, they bringing in outside equity partners? Are they going to do a 1031 exchange? Is it their own cash? I mean, all these things you want to know because it certainly has a bearing on which direction you're going to go, because that dictates time and so on and so forth. So again, if you're dealing with bank financing, then you're probably dealing with someone who's not going to do non-recourse, probably wants a little bit lower fees, somebody that might have need some more flexibility. Maybe they have some credit issues. There's some reason why they're going to go that direction. They don't have the experience. So the bank might be more flexible for that. If you're going agency financing, again, you want non-recourse, they're maxing leverage. They want some interest only. They want the whole thing. And so, agencies, non-recourse, good pricing, interest only, 30-year amortization. The prepays are a little bit more stiff there. If you go CMBS, that's probably because it doesn't fit with an agency somehow. There's something that's quirkier out of the box. And so that's the direction you're going to go if you can't fit within the agency, because they typically can't compete on pricing. So there's some reason why you're going to go that direction. So that's sort of a snapshot on dealing with permanent financing for apartments. Those are the different scenarios you're going to run into, and that's how you're going to funnel down in order to get into what is the product type that I'm going to use or choose when you're giving some feedback to the borrower. Because again, if you're dealing with a bank, you're probably a 25, 30 ammo, 5, 7, 10-year fixed. You're probably, pricing you're gonna have to check out in the market at the time. And a little bit lower fees. Agency, again, 30-year AM, 10-year fixed, non-recourse, yield maintenance or a step down prepay, probably, $12,000 to $25,000 in closing costs. They'll quote you at par, so they don't have an origination fee. CMBS again is 40 to 50,000 in costs, a little bit higher on pricing, non-recourse for sure, 30-year amortization. They could do some interest only, but they're definitely more expensive for sure. And they can be a little bit more volatile because you don't lock rate till close. And so those are some things to think about on the permanent financing for apartments. So this is the apartment scenarios for mining through these types of loans.